how long will the Canadian housing market collapse last?
It'll be painful.
Well, we're going to get into the data from other housing bubbles to see how long it could really last. And we're also going to get into the crazy similarities between this bubble and obviously other countries as well, because it is kind of crazy. So first of all, let's take a look at Canada's prior bubbles. So we're looking at real inflation adjusted prices. And I want to make that clear because purchasing power is what matters here, especially when you're examining long periods of time, because obviously during the 1970s, there was massive amounts of inflation and people would say that there wasn't even a collapse in real estate prices. But there was in terms of the purchasing power, which is really, really important. If a currency's value is declining, even when a market is going up, it could be flat, it could be negative when you adjust it for inflation. And this is adjusted for the CPI in each country. So anyway, let's start off with Canada back in 1976 here. So basically 1976, the bubble's demise lasted 11 years until it recovered, which was around 1986, 1987. So you had an 11-year period where home prices were lower than that peak that happened during the 70s. And if you look at a non-inflation adjusted chart, it looks like there was no decline. And that's why it's so important to look at inflation adjusted. And then you've got the longest, which was the 1989 bubble. That lasted 15 years. Can you just imagine for a second that home prices in Canada declined for another 10, 12 years? You've even got the Canadian banks coming out and saying that the recovery is here. But again, you have to watch inflation adjusted prices and not just look at nominal prices, because they can be very misleading, especially considering the amount of inflation that we've had over the past 10 years. And then you go and look at what happened in 2008. That was obviously very short-lived. It was 2 years. And currently, right now, it's even longer than 2008. So you've got a 3-year plus decline in the housing market right now in Canada. So could this be one that lasts 11 to 15 years? Well, we'll have to wait and find out, but we can certainly take a look at other bubbles to see what happened there. So if you look at some of these other bubbles, you've got the one in Japan, 1973. That took all the way to 1987 to recover. And then you've got the one from the 1990s. Well, that just never recovered. So prices just haven't recovered. And it's not just Japan either. When you look at other countries as well, Spain is a great example of this. 2007, prices peaked and they have not recovered. So still in 2025, home prices have not recovered from the financial crisis in Spain, which is again just showing you how long these things can last when they get so frothy. Because look how much, and look at the run up that Spain went on here, and then it's kind of been going up, going up, going up, but it's still nowhere near the high, which is really, really interesting. And then you look at the UK even, you know, it took until 2020, 2021 to recover from the 2007-2008 financial crisis. If you looked at a nominal chart, you would see that property prices recovered in 2014. But again, it's very misleading, because actually, if you're using housing as a store of wealth, which so many people do, let's face it, the middle class is banking on real estate to retain their wealth value, then you need to look at inflation adjusted prices. You cannot rely on nominal prices. Yes, if you're looking at trends and if you're looking at the short-term picture, by all means, nominal prices are great things to look at. But if you're looking at the long-term picture, you need to be looking at inflation adjusted prices. And the UK, it took 15 years to recover to the prices from the financial crisis in inflation adjusted terms, which is really interesting. And now I want to get get onto Australia, because Australia, very similar dynamic to what has happened in Canada over the years, especially as it goes with government policy as well. But you've actually seen that it's been way more choppy in Australia than in Canada. So it's really interesting. If we go back to Canada here, really not that choppy. If you look, the bubble, according to the mortgage debt data, which I'll throw up on the screen, started around 2004, 2005, and you pretty much seen it go straight up there, apart from in 2007, 2008, where it had a brief pause. It's pretty much gone straight up and just took that normal bubble chart that you would see, and it peaked out at 200 on the index. But if you go to Australia, didn't get to 200 on the index and has been way more choppy. But one place that has also exceeded 200 on the index is New Zealand, and this looks almost identical to the decline in Canada and also the run up as well. Yes, they did have more of a decline and it took a longer recovery to get back to the same price after the financial crisis. It took until around 2014, which is a 7-year period where real residential property prices in New Zealand were not as high as that previous peak in 2007. But if you take a look at the run up since then, again, it was taking kind of a pause, just like in Canada around 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. And then you had the pandemic hit and all the money printing that went on, the fact people could just defer all their bills and all that shit that was happening, and then prices just absolutely exploded. And obviously we know, of course, as well, that in New Zealand they started raising interest rates before Canada, because if you remember, in the very early days of this channel, I was pointing to that, saying, look, New Zealand is raising rates, it's soon going to be coming in Canada.
New Zealand's central bank delivered its 5th straight interest rate hike on Wednesday and signaled a much more aggressive tightening path. First of all, let's just talk about New Zealand's housing market, because it's significantly down, because they're ahead of us in this cycle. We're at 1%, they're at 2%.
I mean, I remember all the people that were commenting saying there will never be rate hikes in Canada. And I mean, how wrong were they when you really look at it? And now you're seeing such a similar decline in real residential property prices in New Zealand as well. So it's very interesting what's going on. And you have to think as well, there are a couple of things which are really important to figure out if property prices are going to suddenly start rising. First, you have to calculate the investment equation. For example, are people going to make money if they buy a house and rent it out? Now, in most cases in Canada, in most cities, that is not happening. People are losing money. So until it gets to a point where people are making money, you're not going to see investors rushing into the market either. Because sentiment has overall flipped as well, you're not seeing the speculators that are in the market as well, because you can't really house flip and speculate on future price growth in a declining market. It's very hard to do that. So that's not happening either. The second thing that you have to watch is affordability, because obviously if it becomes affordable for the average person in Canada to buy a house, which it is not, because if you look at the income multiple, which I'll put on the screen right now, it is completely insane even at the current prices. So prices have much further to decline and incomes have a lot of catching up to do in order for prices to become affordable, and then you get the average home buyer and the middle class entering the market. And I think most of us know and understand that the second option there of prices becoming more affordable and people getting into the market is the best option for Canada and the best option for society in Canada, because Canada is a declining country. There is rising crime. The cost of living is out of control in Canada, and young people, they just don't see any future in Canada. In fact, I advise people all the time, the best thing to do in this situation, if you can, is leave, because Canada is going to be a declining nation for a lot longer, especially if you look at the data that we've been over in this video as well. So it's not going to be turning a corner anytime soon. But that's the best thing that we can hope for, is homes become affordable again. It's highly unlikely given the amount of corporate interest now in housing markets, and given how dystopian Canada is really becoming. I mean, you can't even go walking in a forest anymore without getting a $25,000 fine. I mean, that is how dystopian some parts of the country are really becoming.
A leisurely walk in the woods is no longer allowed in Nova Scotia, and it may not be for the rest of the summer.
Effective 4 p.m. today, telling Nova Scotians, stay out of the woods.
And then you've just got the skyrocketing crime. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But you can see which one ends up with society continuing to decline. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you check out this video here. And then if you're looking for a VPN and also want to help support the channel, then get the best and the fastest VPN, which is ExpressVPN. There's a link in the description below. And I will see you in the next one.